Shantam Faltakuni.
God morgen and happy Tears Day to you. I hope this week has started off wonderfully. Today we're talking about the courage of Tyr. Before I get started though, I want to say, first and foremost, I want to give a huge shout out to the Mukluk Mafia. What a beautiful piece. This one I'm calling The Heart of Nanook. It does have a blue heart surrounded by polar bear fur. So I really want to give a shout out. Beautiful piece that I use now to kind of keep my ponytail together. But beautiful piece, and I just want to give a shout out to her, Mukluk Mafia. You can find her on the Facebook and of course many other places as well. Again, thank you so much. It's a beautiful piece and I absolutely adore it. I also want to take a minute for those of you who haven't had a chance to like, follow, and subscribe. Please do so. You can do so at any of the places over here, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, all of those. You can also find us on Streamlabs, which is where we broadcast live. To get there, you can just go to akoutlaw.live, and there you can find our today's show, of course, being on live, and then you can also find the tip jar, which we're always appreciative of. We deeply appreciate all of our support and all of you who contribute to distributing these messages far and wide, that many may benefit from them. I also want to give a huge shout out to all of my friends, family, and closer than that at New Reality TV, newrealitytv.com, a streaming channel dedicated to a plethora of perspectives to help us obtain our spiritual path, or recognize our spiritual path, and hopefully obtain some mental space. For those of you who would like to join us this morning, we're available on Facebook chat, and we have TikTok up. We're kind of keeping an eye on that as well as the Streamlabs chat. So all kinds of ways to get a hold of us. You can always email us as well at shaman@akoutlaw.com. Finally, all of that contact information, all of those locations, all of the information about me, my show, my message, all of those things can be found at norsewhispers.com. There you can also add a /coaching and look into if you should happen to need someone ear to bend, or someone to offer advice and maybe some understanding as to grasping our own spiritual path. So wonderful opportunities for you to reach out at any time. So today we're talking about Tyr, one of my favorite of all the gods and goddesses recognized in the Norse legends and lore. Tyr, we really see him from a historical perspective. We really see him begin to get recognized and seen for what he is during the migration from the Celts of the south of Europe into Germania at the time, would go on to become, of course, Germany today. But we see these tribes that are recognizing him for his role. Originally, he was more or less kind of one of the higher ups, and more or less a chieftain, kind of provided guidance and wisdom, for he was the god recognized as the god of law and justice, righteousness. So Tyr represents a very powerful balance between the natural order of things. He would go on, of course, within the legends, to be recognized for his courage as well, when he was willing to put his hand in the mouth of Fenrir, that Fenrir would be chained to kind of keep him in place until Ragnorok, of course, in which case the chains would break and Fenrir would run amok and create havoc and death and destruction, for that's really what Fenrir will do eventually when we get there. So Tyr really represents courage. Now, one of the things that I'm always entertained by, I should say, is when we're always talking about peace, love, joy, harmony, and contentment, comfort, those things, and I get people all the time who tell me, "Oh, well, that's really weakness. It's really feminine. It's really this, that, or this other thing." And I'm like, "You're silly. You really don't understand what the reality is." For when we talk about expressing love towards, particularly towards another person, when we're wanting to be involved in a relationship, as an example, one of the key ingredients that's going to be required is that we become vulnerable. We kind of open ourselves up when we talk about communicating with the ancestors. One of the visualizations that I was given very early in my channeling, as I came to know my grandfathers and other spiritual entities. One of the visualizations I was giving for channeling is to kind of take our chest, just divide it, and then pull it open like cabinet doors, right? So we're just going to open them like this. And this is going to allow, and again, this is a visualization that we have. So we're really opening ourselves up to that energy coming in. So we're going to just open our chest. And again, this is a visualization to help us kind of extend out that heart and those emotional connections to the ancestors. Now, one of the things that vulnerability kind of leads us, obviously, naked to, obviously, is this idea that someone could hurt us. They could create this negative energy that could create within us this kind of negative emotional energy that is not very comfortable, right? And that happens. And there is a very real possibility of that happening. It's nature of the beast, right? So we're going to open ourselves up. One of the things we're talking about here is the courage to do that, right? The courage to set aside all this macho, egotistical bullshit and actually open ourselves up to emotional expression from the ancestors, from the spiritual realm, and certainly from other human beings. Being kind and loving and harmonious and genuine is not, and I repeat very loudly, is not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of strength. For we know when we speak about Tyr and his first recognition in early Germania, we're talking about a justice system, applying justice, balance, law, right? And sometimes we have to we have to kind of put our backs against the wall, if you will, and hold the line. It has to be just, it has to be balanced. That takes strength. Not maybe physical strength, but mental strength. And mental strength is something we all have. All we have to do is commit ourselves to. I'm always kind of another scenario that comes to mind is when we kind of focus our mind on wanting to do something. So it's something we want to do. We want to learn how to ride motorcycles. We want to learn how to skydive, maybe. Whatever it may be. Okay? And we put our mind to it. And we say, I'm going to learn this. This is what I'm going to do. Right? For those individuals who are listening who may have completed medical school or are going to medical school, you know that we have to focus sometimes. We have to just set the mind to getting something done, right? This is the same idea. This is the same mental toughness that you can apply to just any facet within our experiences of this reality. Anytime we are setting our mind to something and getting it done. Now, we can also set our mind to being happy. We can say, I just don't want to be sad. I don't want to be angry. I don't want to be frustrated. I don't want to be all these things. I want to be happy. We're going to put our mind to it, and we're going to make ourselves happy. Now, you're saying, well, that doesn't sound very happy. In many times, you'll hear people use the phrase, fake it until you make it. Okay? I love this phrase because what fake it till you make it means, in this example, or in this instance, is we're putting our mind, we're setting it in our mind, we're putting our mind to something, and we're going to force ourselves to learn it. So we're blocking out negativity, we're blocking out the potential of failure, we're blocking out the potential of unlikeness or whatever. We're blocking out all of that stuff to focus on what we want to be or do, right? In the same way, we see when we find the one. For those of you who have found the one in your life, firstly and foremost, congratulations. I am absolutely thrilled for you. Secondly, notice that moment that we had in the very beginning when we met the person and we were face to face, and everything else got blocked out. We were completely focused on that other person. We were focused on the smell of their hair, maybe their perfume, the curvature of their face, the twinkles in their eyes. We were focused on them specifically, very focused. And what that meant was everything outside of that kind of disappeared into the blur of reality, right? Just kind of blurred out. We were focused. For those of you who have a hobby, you may have noticed the same thing. You're doing some detailed work, maybe in beading or in model making or in very small detail painting. And we're focused on this, and we're literally able to block everything else. We're just pushing that all away. We're focused. This is the same mentality that you can use to find happiness, to find joy, to find harmony, right? When we focus on it, we're going to bring all this down to a focus. And when we focus on something, we can literally block all the doubt, uncertainty, and negativity. Same way. Same exact way. It works the same way. So thinking about being unhappy, thinking about being depressed, thinking about being... Now, I'm going to caveat this conversation by saying there are chemical reactions, biochemistry within the body, that may kind of set us up, if you will, for depression or sadness or anxiety or those things. But your biochemistry is controlled by you. Now, having said that, should we decide to use intoxicating substances from outside extrinsically into the body, that will have an effect on this, but nonetheless, you can control the biochemistry of your body. You control your biochemistry using your emotional states. Your emotional state controls the biochemistry balances that appear in the brain and that are then recognized as emotion. Now, your brain, for those individuals who suffer from depression, right? Your brain is recognizing a chemical composition that's appeared in the brain as a particular emotional state, right? So if you are imagining in your mind that whatever this current situation is sad, your brain kind of makes a note of that and says, okay, next time we see this chemical composition, this similar or identical chemical composition come into the brain, we're going to translate it as this, whatever this is. Well, in this case, we're talking about depression. We're going to interpret it as depression, right? And then that goes through our bandwidth, of course, tube or truth, tube of truth, I think is what my grandfathers call it, where it's then processed by the next layer or the next step in our processing, and this is called the me gate. Me gate. The me gate is where I can say, you know, that could be interpreted as being super sad or depressing, but I'm not going to look at it that way. I'm going to change my perspective, and I want to look at it in a better light, in a different perspective. Whenever I'm thinking about perspectives, one of the things I always come to is my father's funeral when I was a younger man. My father passed away when I was a young man, and in the morning we held a funeral ceremony. Okay, a very somber, very sullen event that was very sad. It was, and that's, it was a funeral, right? And so that same evening, of course, my family, being Irish Danes, we celebrated a wake for him. And the wake, of course, was more of a celebration of life. But from antiquity, we see a different perspective. The funeral focuses on the loss of the physical form. This is why you will have very often open casket services or open services where we're picturing the physical form there, and we're seeing them, and so we're more or less embracing, recognizing the loss of this physical form from the plane. We're not going to have that person to talk with, hang out with, whatever anymore. They've moved on away from their physical form into their spiritual self. Whereas awake instead looks at the arrival of the spirit into the spiritual realm. This is the mental difference between these two events. You see, the wake is more about the life, the spirit that drove that individual. Remember, it's not really as much the body that matters, it's the spirit that's driving it, right? So it doesn't really matter what they look like or what they sound like. It's more about what their spirit is, how our spirits are interacting. So we find the wake, or a celebration of life, celebrates the arrival of that spirit back to the spiritual realm, back to the home of the ancestors. This is a mind shift from the loss of the physical form to the arrival of the spiritual form. Now, for those of us who may know better, we know that once they arrive in their spiritual realm, we have full access to them if we're willing to just, again, be courageous enough to open that chest up and allow these ancestors to communicate to our hearts. Now, a very critical piece there is that we're opening ourselves up to that. And a lot of people are afraid of that. They fear this. And so this is one of the things that we find most often than not when others around us are kind of looking at us, are kind of building a perspective and trying to influence others, that somehow we're weak, or all of these negative connotation things, when in fact, to be courageous enough to open ourselves up to the ancestors, to allow the ancestors to communicate with us, to love us, we're opening a whole new level of reality. Okay, we're opening up this whole new realm that we've never have considered before. One of the things that I struggled personal, just self-revealed here a little, is as I came to my shamanic travels, and really began to focus on this much bigger picture of things, I struggled with it. I struggled with it for the same reason, is that I kind of looked at, those individuals who would be willing to, go out and hug trees and things of this nature. I viewed them as weak or crazy, and I was like, oh, yeah, no. But today, I love trees. I love hugging them. I love hugging everybody. Now, I don't know if I told you that, but I do. I'm a hugger. I love to hug. My point is, when I was first crossing this mental paradigm and I was shifting over into a more spiritual view of the world, I really struggled with this idea that this kind of presented itself to me as weakness, as, flower children of the 60s. Now, I was born in the 60s, so I get to say that. But ultimately, I kind of looked at it as weakness when in fact, quite the contrary. It's strength. It takes strength, mental strength, to be courageous, to open ourselves up, to make ourselves vulnerable, to allow the emotional energy of the ancestors to come into our heart. So oftentimes I hear phrases like, well, they're kind of weak or patsy or pansy, whatever, all those wonderful flowers, by the way. Um, when in fact, that's not the case. The fact is that's the demonstration of strength. It's the demonstration of courage that allows us to kind of open ourselves up to the ancestors. It allows us a much more broad journey forward with a much greater understanding of the entirety of this thing we call life. So today, as we speak about Tyr, we're really speaking about courage, what it takes to be us. You are amazing. And I say that all the time because that's true, but because think about it for a minute and think about it in a modern day sense. We start our existence, our biological existence starts with the connection of cells, right? And those cells are constructed of cells from our ancestors, from our parents, obviously provide the largest piece, but within each of our parents' collection resides their parents and 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 their parents. For those of you who may have touched on genealogy at some point in your lives, you know by the time we get maybe 3 or 4 generations back, we're talking about a collection of people who may have had the wildest journey through their lives to reach the point to actually meet the other person, much less the magic that happened when they did meet and fell in love and had children, right? So by the time you get 5 generations back, you're talking about a very large collection of people who had many different journeys, all coming together to make those children, to make those children, to make those children, to make you. So think of just the enormity of that math. All comes down to you. Now, then, each of those, your parents now, have this enormity that have all come to you. And all of those ancestors have provided some level of DNA manipulation, right? So now we're getting into the science. They have manipulated their DNA much the same way that you do. Once you're born, once those cells come together and they begin to form, we can manipulate using mental processes to generate biochemistry that can then alter the structure of our DNA. And we begin a lifetime of manipulating our DNA. Now, when we have children and we come together with our partner, our spouse, and we biologically create a child, those are simply snapshots in time of what our DNA was when we came together, right? And then we will continue manipulating our DNA until we leave this biological form. That's what the biochemistry does. It manipulates cells. And that's what its job is supposed to do, right? Is that we're evolving as we go along, as we have these experiences, as we respond emotionally to these experiences in our lives, we're manipulating our DNA. Okay? Now, having said that, now we have energy. Energy comes in the form of a couple of different ways. We know about physical sensory input: sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. All of these provide energy into the brain. We don't pass pictures. This isn't the old sneaker net where our eyeball simply hands a piece of paper to our optic nerve. The optic nerve then runs off with it, right? And does what it needs to do. We don't do that. It's converted to an energy. That energy is then passed into an emotional filter. What is our mood, right? Our mood is the emotional filter, the first emotional filter. That emotional filter's job is to interpret and or manipulate now this electronic signaling from our sensory input to make it match what my mood is, right? And then at the same time, it's going to release instructions down to my heart to release hormones into my bloodstream, right? So I'm going to send these hormones bouncing around. They're going to wind up in my brain. My brain then looks at that chemical composition that just arrived at the brain, compares it to its internal, intrinsic recipe book, and says, oh, here's this, and this is what it means. This is how I feel. Then it passes that energy through the tube of truth, all right, to the me gate. Now, the me gate, of course, many have just left that gate open. Whatever comes out of the tube of truth is what we're going to feel. Others, however, can control that me gate and say, wait, no, I don't want to feel that way right now. I want to feel this other way. And so we're going to control that. In the same way that we our depression may set, we get a happy thought and our depression says, no, I want to be sad. I want to be more somber, whatever the case, right? So that me gate is there, and we can control that me gate. We can be any way we want to be. Now, one of the things that's going to happen is when we decide on something in that me gate, we let energy through the me gate, the first thing energy is going to do after the me gate is reset those emotional filters or our mood. All right, so now all the physical sensory input coming into our brain is now filtering through that. So super critical that we understand our thought process. This allows us to take an active control or active managing our emotional state, thereby managing our biochemistry, thereby managing our DNA evolution. So it's all in our hands. So today, what I'd like you to think about firstly and foremost is obviously our emotional state, keeping that where we want to be, not allowing influential energies to change us, derail us, move us where we want to, and then figure out, what do we want to be? If we want to be happy, then we have to take control of the me gate. Begin to close that gate and say, no, that's not the way I want to feel. I want to feel happy. I want to find joy. I want to find peace. I want to find love. All of these things that we really want in our natural state. All right? So today's exercise, as we think about the God tier, is to think about being courageous and to feel what we want to feel. Not be pressured, not be influenced by others, but feel what we want to feel. All right? So I want you to use today and think of tier and think of controlling your emotional state. Remember, ultimately, your happiness is in your hands. Love and light. I wish you the very best Tuesday. We will see you again tomorrow morning, where we will speak about the wisdom of Odin. And then tomorrow night, Sporgsmall, we're going to answer questions. So for those of you who have a question, make sure you visit NorseWhispers.com. Scroll all the way to the bottom, look to the left. You'll see a big orange button that says Ask Me Questions. Kick those questions out. If I make a show about your particular question, I'm going to send you a free t-shirt. What's the loss? No shipping, no handling, no special fees, no nothing. Just free t-shirt. So stop by, ask your question. All you can get is an answer. Love and light, my friends. Have a wonderful Tuesday. We will see you again tomorrow morning. Love and light.